What up? It's Connor Whitmore here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the new album from REZZ, released on Mousetrap, Certain Kind of Magic. Isabelle Rezazadeh, also known as REZZ, is a 23-year-old Ukrainian-born Canadian from Niagara Falls, Ontario. Sorry, can we just take a moment to appreciate how awesome her second name is? Rezazadeh, I mean, fuck me, that's cool. Whose rise within dark electronic music has been nothing short of meteoric ever since she started producing at around the age of 18. Being inspired mostly by deadmau5 and realising upon watching him both perform and produce live that this is exactly what she wanted to do. Sharing her music for free on SoundCloud before being discovered by someone working for Nest HQ, the subsidiary imprint of Skrillex's Owsla label. The dubstep legend contacting her upon hearing her stuff, before organising for her first full EP, entitled Insurrection, to be released on Nest in July 2015. At this point, or maybe slightly before that release, her music was discovered by Mousetrap producer Atlas, who sent it directly to Chris Johnson, the general manager for deadmau5's label. And it's from here that she really took off as a producer, signing to Mousetrap and releasing two ground-shaking EPs, The Silence is Deafening and Something Wrong Here, to wide acclaim in 2016. Blasting into the electronic music consciousness with tracks like Edge, Voice in the Wall and Purple Gusher. Slow-paced, enchanting, pulsating seizure music that no one quite knew how to categorise, but sure knew how to appreciate, a complete breath of fresh air amidst the mountain of brutal stuff that was coming out that year. From Getter's Radical Dude EP to Virtual Riot's Chemistry, and tons of other tracks produced in that wild, uncontrollable way. People have highlighted the tech influences in her music. Some have even gone as far as to label it as techno. Others see it as a kind of midway point between trip-hop and original dubstep, but my favourite description of it is her own, fucking whatever. She has, however, been quoted in an interview with DJ Times as having said, "You can do so much more with the space of those slow beats. Chill, head-bobbing music is what defines me." So I think that's where the emphasis lies with her stuff. All coming before her debut album, Mass Manipulation, put out on Mousetrap in August of last year, for which she won a Juno Award for Best Electronic Album of 2017. A lot of people, however, coming out to dispute whether it was indeed an album, or just a longer EP at 8 tracks. A project that, to me at least, certainly represented the latter more than the former, a topic I delve into way more in a video I did on that exact distinction, linked somewhere here. An album that had tracks harking straight back to those spellbinding EPs, notably Relax and Diluted Brains, but generally I didn't find myself enjoying it anywhere near as much as the EPs. Sitting in this weird middle ground between wanting to be an album and not being that, certainly more an extended EP, wall-to-wall bangers with little structural development from the preceding project. Bereft somewhat of the subtlety, in spite of how huge her sound was, that made The Silence is Deafening and Something Wrong Here so captivating pretty much from beginning to end. But fast forward almost exactly a year later to the day, and REZZ, known to her cult fandom as Space Mum, is back with her sophomore album for the Mousetrap label. And I don't use the word cult lightly, by the way. There is a 15,000 strong Facebook group called The Cult of REZZ, the main base for her fans. It's pretty awesome. The formulation of which Rezazadeh puts down to her sound existing in its own lane and having an identity, even though she has drawn countless comparisons to the likes of Gesaffelstein, its uniqueness certainly rings true within bass music today. Now, I must admit, considering this project also comes in at 8 tracks, I went into it thinking it would be much of the same structurally, the kinds of ideas it delivers. But to be honest, this one definitely seems more experimental than its predecessor, with a multitude of new sounds deployed across the board. For example, the vocal sample usage in the 4th track, Life and Death, alongside Death Pact, something unheard of before with REZZ's music in this interjectory way, playing a part not only in the drops, but the midsection too. complementing the actual sounds in the drops too, mostly clunky and rudimentary, but with a really nice thickness and waviness to them. It's not smooth, but there's a great energy and a clear interaction between everything going on. Other instances of experimentation include the glitchy approaches of Teleportal and the crazy ones, the former alongside Kotek in particular being quite the interesting combination of sounds. The high-pitched croaking noises being the most outlandish on display, just not something you would expect from her outright, and a welcome direction for her style to be taken in. In the crazy ones with 13, the glitchy approach doesn't quite come off as well, just seems a little unsure of what it's doing without a main selling point, even though the second drop is a much richer, fleshed out development. But my uncertainty regarding experimentation extends into the final track Toxin alongside Fitch, which I really want to appreciate, but in light of the rest of the album and her general style, I'm finding it hard to. The main notes in the drop are really pleasant, lovely storytelling vibe to them, but overall it's a bit weak and too far removed from everything before it, an uninvited guest to the party. And what's more, it doesn't strike me in any way as an album-ending track. It's experimental to the point that it sounds like a demo, more than a well-cut, complete, refined number. The experimentation being evident enough to realise that mass manipulation, which has hints of that approach, is very much the gateway from her EPs to this newer style. The structures are mostly the same, plodding 100 BPM beats with slight alterations in synth tempo throughout, but there are wholly different musical approaches here that haven't been on display before, which, as I've explained, works in part and others not, all four musicians experimenting and trying out new things, but the risk of course is always how people will interpret those changes from the norm. The track here that feels most vintage REZZ is the second alongside 1788L, Hex. Starting with a wonderfully creepy yet alluring lead, the electric notes running over the top doing a fantastic job of elevating it to new heights as it progresses. But again, it's the experimentation and arguably 1788L's influence here that lets the track down. The drops are brash, abrasive and a bit directionless. Certainly more considered the second time around, and it's a very definite coming together of styles, but generally that sound is just a bit too much, especially for what we're used to with REZZ's music. The other most noticeably forceful tune being the opener, Witching Hour, the heaviness of which I feel it gets into too quickly, but the way the melody is introduced midway through the drop is absolutely magnificent, effortless, REZZ in her element. And it's instances like these that remind me of how much I love her older stuff, simultaneously alienating and inviting, distancing you from it before enveloping you in its demonic bubble. But for me, Certain Kind of Magic feels for the most part a lot more one-dimensional in terms of the effect it has on you, evident from the opening few seconds in Witching Hour, percussion that's intricate but pretty thin and lifeless almost. A lot of this album being not so much an overwhelming, all-encompassing experience, but a relatively bare, stripped-back delivery of sounds, assembling them more than harmoniously melding them together. Something I'm not warming to just yet, but happy to get used to over time. It's perfectly possible, just got to get used to it as a switch from the norm. I would also say, in spite of everything I've said so far, that there is a really familiar feeling to these 8 tracks for the most part. The weirdness, alienation and otherworldly appeal are still there in abundance, even though it drags in tracks like Flying Octopus and Spider on the Moon. Tracks that aren't as overt in terms of what they deliver sonically, leaving you searching for more, and as a result they come across as these really chilled, ponderous songs that you just end up appreciating for what they are. On the topic of those 2 tracks, by the way, awesome titles, not unusual for REZZ in their ability to conjure up fantastic images before you've even listened to the music. But in noticing patterns with REZZ's music by this point, it's almost as if certain things have to be in place for the songs as wholes to be recognised alongside her best material. A mystifying melody permeating the track, gloomy synths, thumping percussion, an air of the unknown, all of which are present in her most ear-catching hits. As I've said, the experimentation works in parts here, but the bits I enjoy most are those that remind me of what she's best at, the things that got her popular in the first place. And whilst I wouldn't say that any of the 8 tracks here are holistic in that way, each of those aspects or factors mentioned are available for consumption across the album. The thudding, spooky drop to Witching Hour, the journeying midsection of Spider on the Moon, the introductory melody of Hex. On the subject of melodies actually, it's almost as if she's running out of well-working ones to suit her style of music. Flying Octopus is the first inkling we get here of REZZ exhausting that gloomy type of sound and running out of melodies to use. But you hear it in other tracks such as Teleportal, trying a little bit too hard in that respect, seeming a little bit forced, the organic sway and magnetism of melodies from tracks in past EPs lost somewhat. And so taking all of that into account, as well as everything else I've said so far here, it's strikingly similar to Mass Manipulation in that it doesn't really feel any more like an album than it does an EP. There's next to no sort of story or journey to it, just a succession of similarly structured tracks, meaning that for an album it really is over in a flash. But again, it does just have that vital REZZ feeling to it, which I and thousands if not millions of others find hard to put down. Knowing it's hers makes me love it, that she's made it with similar intentions to everything she's made before. That's what makes me enjoy it and will make me come back to it again and again. Her music entrances you and will always have that air of mystery about it, something that has been retained from project to project. It's what she goes by and it will never be lost. This isn't to say, by the way, that it's the kind of hypnosis that tricks you into enjoying it. It's the natural pull of the music, really does just lure you in and keep you completely locked in the beat. I mean, titles like Mass Manipulation are of course to be taken lightly, but they say it all really. The effect her music has on you cannot be underestimated, less so in this project than past releases, but it's still there, moving you in a specific way that I'm not sure any other electronic musician can, even though she has experimented a bit here and ventured beyond her most identifiable style. It still pulls me in with little effort. It's interesting to see where she goes from here, whether she goes full out on the experimental front, or harks back to her more original Mousetrap style, how she strikes the balance between the two. There's also the question of how she maintains the high standard that she set. Does she try new things more and more, or perfect the style that brought her furthest into the limelight in the first place? Because for me, this album constitutes as a slight regression in that sense. I've enjoyed it more with each listen, but it works neither completely on an experimental front, or when she's reverting to her original style. It's more like a test album. It's still a good album, as I said before, just knowing it's hers makes it a good listen, but it's not on a level with her past stuff in many ways. Potentially more put together than her first album, but it runs along very similar lines with slightly more experimentation, and I can't sense too much development and refined adventurism here. I want to see her take on the epic. There are hints of it in her earlier stuff, but she's gone more and more down the avenue of confining herself to these really short, narrow tracks that don't allow for the scope that her music can reach. My main feeling is that the epic is there to be exercised from her style. You know, what would it take to have a couple of really lengthy, drawn-out, scene-setting introductions, for example? Image is such a big part of her music, and she needs to capitalise on that more. While she may have perfected her sound, I feel like the structures can be advanced in many ways. Talked about the intros, but the midsections could also be expanded on so much more. Her style deserves it. One of the most amazing sounds I've ever witnessed live, genuinely had me in a trance, the bass tickled my ears, and that can definitely translate into her production on an unprecedented level to what we've witnessed already. Everything is there for her, the female face of EDM at current, with one of the most distinctive mask or helmetless onstage appearances. There's such a movement behind her, but it's time to take it to the next level now. All in all though, it's extremely exciting for her going forward. Not only does she have a ridiculous body of work behind her already, but she's also a very quirky, honest, humble, genuine personality, an example to all in the EDM scene. For one, got a potential deadmau5 collaboration to look forward to in the future, so that'll be interesting if and when it comes out. Now in terms of a favourite from Certain Kind of Magic, then I would have to go with Life and Death. I was sceptical going into this track given its title and how it might live up to that, but for me it has the most to it of the 8 tracks, the grimacing intro, the vocal interjections in the drops, which are some of the best bits of experimentation on the album, and it has a great energy throughout. And in terms of recommendations, if you enjoyed this album, then I think you do well to go on a good mid-tempo binge, but in terms of specific artists I would look at A-Glory, and then others such as Slews, No Etiquette and Volic, and plenty of other stuff from the Type 91 label actually. And so that is that for another review on the Nawtystep channel, this time of the new REZZ album, released on Mousetrap, Certain Kind of Magic. Thank you very much, and as always, for tuning in. Be sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on Certain Kind of Magic. What did you guys make of it? Do you have a favourite track of the 8? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, then be sure to give it a big ol' thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.